All right, we're recording.
Okay, good evening, everybody. We are conducting a community open house and listening session as part of the Kenmore Fiscal Sustainability process, which includes a task force, and we've got a couple of our task force members here. This is a community meeting we've all been eager to have. It was supposed to have been 4 months ago, but because of the COVID pandemic, the task force went on a hiatus for a while and has just resumed within the last 2 weeks. And the task force members are starting to develop their recommendations. So this is a very opportune time for the public to be engaged, because before the task force members make any decisions and recommendations to the city manager, we do want to hear from the public and get your perceptions, your sentiments, your suggestions and ideas as well. So thank you all for being here tonight. I thought I would first just call upon the staff people and our consultant, Steve Toller, to just say hello, so you see their voices as well. So maybe Rob, as city manager, I'll have you start.
Hi, I'm Rob, city manager for Kenmore.
And Joanne?
Hello, I'm Joanne Gregory. I'm the finance and administration director for Kenmore.
And Tila?
Hello, I'm Tila. I'm the permit specialist for development services, just filling in for some clerk duties.
We couldn't do this without you, so thank you. And Steve?
Hi, everybody. My name is Steve Toller. I'm a partner with Management Partners, and we've been working with the city as an independent group to give our analysis on the fiscal sustainability strategy. So it's good to be here tonight.
And I don't want to take away from Rob because he's going to walk you through the process, but I want to point out that tonight we have 4 of our 6 task force members here at the moment. Jeff Pooley, Elizabeth Springer, who else is, Spring, I'm sorry. Lynn is here, and Fernell. So we've got 4 of the 6 of you are here. So there's Lynn waving, and Fernell was just on the screen a minute ago. Elizabeth's up there too. Okay, good. With that, I am going to just go through the agenda real quickly and a couple ground rules, because I don't know about you, but I don't have too much experience doing community meetings through Zoom, so we want to make sure that in the interest of getting everybody the equal opportunity to participate and to be heard, we're going to have a few ground rules tonight. The first is that we will have speakers speak as we do at the city council meetings for just 3 minutes. And Teal will show you a clock that gives you some sense of how long you've talked and how much time you have left. I want to give everyone the opportunity to speak, so I won't call on you a second time until everybody who has wanted to speak a first time gets the chance to do so. We're also going to just kind of mute people because we want to avoid any background distractive noises, but when it comes time for your opportunity to speak, Tila will unmute you and I will give you a chance to go ahead. And I'm going to let Tila go through some of the technology in a second, but we have ways that you can signal that you're ready to speak or that you have a comment you want to make. I want to reiterate that the city is very interested in having you all comment tonight and to even help influence the recommendations that will go to the city council. So it's really imperative that we address the issues that are on the docket for tonight. The fiscal sustainability of the city, the long-term financial sustainability, I should say. So there are no other topics that are really relevant tonight, and I would ask you to really focus your comments on the topics at hand. And then the more specific that you can be, the more helpful you will be. Hopefully you've seen things on the website of the task force and this process that will allow you to have a sense of what kinds of things we're talking about and the trade-offs. Maybe you even participated in the balancing act tool. So that's just a quick overview of some of the ground rules, and I'll probably repeat a couple of them as we get to the different sessions of the meeting. And with that, I'm going to ask just Tila to jump in and kind of give us a little heads up on how will the technology work this evening.
Yeah, so probably a lot of what you see on the bottom of your screen, you're able to mute and unmute yourself. So just a reminder to try to keep yourself muted if we're not asked to speak. You know, especially even if you're not talking, there can sometimes be background noise that's distracting. If you do want to speak, then go ahead and raise your hand. So I don't mean like physically raise your hand, but there's a button also on the bottom that will notify us and add a little icon next to you so Jim can call on you and he wants to have you talk. And we do not have the chat option tonight for this meeting. So if you do want to provide some written comments, I can just, well, is it on the agenda, Jim, your email? It's jim@falconergroup.net.
Yes.
Yeah, so that should be where you can find that. And then we also are going to have some polling questions pop up. So they'll come up on your screen. Then you'll just be able to click on your answers and submit. So I'm really looking forward to having some community participation tonight.
Okay, thank you, Tila. I just have to point out one thing. Now, right on my screen, there are so many people listed among the participants that the little area that shows people wanting to raise their hand, I can't see it the way I used to before. I still see reactions, for example, but is it just me? I just have to scroll down and.
You mean to be able to raise your hand?
Right, so that I can see
Okay,
the
you might not be able to do that as a co-host.
Okay, I'll rely on
Since
you
they
then.
changed it, yeah. So, but that's wherever you saw it before. It should be where everyone else saw it. I think just on the bottom.
It's in the participants window.
Oh, okay, John Anderson. So if you open, can you see the bottom, John? On there's like a little kind of bar that opens. It says participants and polls. Actually, you might not see that. Participants. Mute maybe.
Or
If
just
you click participants, you should be able to raise your hand next to your own name.
okay, well then I'll see it that way.
I don't see where you can raise your hand. It says invite or Alt-I.
Okay. Looks like Cody just raised his hand. Can you help him? Because I don't have the
Yeah.
same screen.
Yeah, if open participants and it's all the way down at the bottom, Invite.
Okay.
mutiny or raise hand. That's what I see.
Yeah, I have invite, Alt-I, and that's all.
And that's exactly what I have. So maybe
Oh.
John and I have an Apple computer. Does that make any difference?
Oh,
Is
it
it tiny
could.
little
I might
three
have to
dots?
rely on you, not to belabor this, but I might have to just rely on you, Tila.
I'm not Apple.
Okay.
Okay.
And we're a small enough.
Well,
group.
okay, John. Yeah, just actually raise your hand. Yeah, we'll see that. I'll be looking at both places.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you, Tila, very much. Okay, and with that, I am going to turn it over to Rob, who's going to start off by talking about the financial challenges facing the city and the reason for this process and how we are working to address those.
All right, thanks, Jim, and thanks, Tila. So in 1 week, the city's going to have a birthday, August 31st. The city's going to turn 22 years old. And ever since we become a city, the city's been, at least as far as I know, been adopting balanced budgets. And the city's actually been able to build up its reserves pretty well. And so during the 22 years we've been a city, we've been doing okay financially. Like I said, we've been balancing budgets, building up reserves. In a separate pot and separate category of money, we've also been building capital projects. We put a lot of money in SR 522, put curb gutter sidewalks, landscaping, massive storm drain, water quality improvements, street lighting, all those sorts of things, and many other capital projects since we've been a city. Capital projects are separate from the operating fund and for the most part have separate funding sources that are one-time in nature. Tonight, the discussion is about the operating budget, and that's what this process has been about. So like I said, over the years, we've been adopting balanced operating budgets and been able to build up our reserve funds. But we've also always, or at least since I've been here, and probably before I've been here, we also have maintained what we call a 6-year financial forecast. And what we do is we're always looking out 6 years to see how our operating budget's doing. And when I say operating budget, I generally mean the general fund and the street fund. Those two combined make up our main operating budgets. And the general fund feeds the street fund. The street fund has some of its own revenue sources, like gas tax, but it can't sustain itself on its own, and so it needs a subsidy from the general fund. So the two are very interconnected and kind of joined at the hip. So those two operating funds were, and our other funds, we look at and keep a close eye on, keep the 6-year forecast always in our view. And over the years, we've seen that the lines are going to cross someday. When I say lines are going to cross, what I mean is that revenues are going to not keep pace with expenditures, and eventually expenditures are going to exceed revenues. And we've been aware that this is likely to happen out in the future, and we've been watching it for quite a long time. And we've been taking measures to keep the lines from crossing. We've been making cuts, we've been making revenue enhancements, we've been doing other things to keep the lines from crossing. But there's only so much you can do administratively and on the margins before you actually say, okay, this problem is not going away. We need to have a community conversation about it. So last year, I believe it was about fall of last year, the city council decided to go through a financial sustainability plan process and bring on a task force of Kenmore residents to help us and do a bunch of community outreach and stakeholder input along the way. So I believe in October of last year, they approved a charter for this task force, and they directed Joanne and me to get going on assembling the task force and get them together and start meeting. So the task force got going soon after the beginning of the year. We also did a statistically valid survey of residents in early December 2019. And that asked a bunch of questions, but it did ask some financial questions about what people knew about our revenue situation and our expenditure situation and some other helpful information in that survey. But like I said, we got the task force together in earlier this year, and it was the first few meetings were just a lot of information sharing. So we told the task force about our budget, how it works, the different funds, how our city services are provided. We talked about our priority-based budgeting tool that we use and some other things to help the task force fully understand the picture. And Steve Toller of Management Partners came on board to give us his own independent look at our financial forecast and help us, what we call, define the problem. And sure enough, his analysis was very similar to ours as far as when the lines are crossed and when the lines will cross and what's causing that. So he presented his findings to the task force. And Steve and Management Partners were gearing up to provide some recommendations on how to solve the situation and how to have a long-term balanced financial forecast when, guess what happened? The pandemic happened. And we thought, you know what, we could keep going. We could keep this task force going, online via Zoom, but the public's probably not paying attention to us right now. They probably have their focus on other more important things, namely the pandemic. So we took a pause, and we didn't know when we'd get started again. And I think the task force, the last time the task force met was, I think, in April, if I'm not mistaken. So they took a pause, but the problem didn't go away. In fact, it got worse. The pandemic made the situation even more urgent because our independent forecast that Steve Toller provided showed our lines crossing sometime in 2022. Well, with the pandemic and the drop in revenues now, they're about to cross now in 2020 and maybe early 2021. So given that the date of the lines crossing has moved up, it's become more urgent. Yes, we still have a pandemic, but I think people have kind of, what's the word? I don't want to say gotten used to the pandemic. That's not right. But things have kind of leveled off, at least from what I can tell. And is the pandemic still a distraction and still an issue? Yes, but we can't ignore this financial sustainability issue for too much longer either. So we decided to bring the task force back together. The meeting they had just recently where they got back together was on August 11th. And that's where Steve Toller and management partners presented their findings and recommendations for possible solutions. It was quite a menu of choices that Steve provided. So those recommendations or menu of options for solving our financial problems has been presented to the task force. They've had a couple of weeks to chew on those and digest them and think about them. And then fast forward to tonight, where we are having this open house. We've also had the Balancing Act tool out for the public to participate in. We'll be presenting the results of that Balancing Act tonight at the task force meeting at 7 o'clock. So that's where we're at on process. After the task force meets, so the task force job tonight and possibly tomorrow night if they need the time, their job tonight is to come up with a recommendation for a 6-year financial forecast that's balanced. They'll try to get it done tonight. If they can't, then we have tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. as an overflow meeting for them to continue their discussion. Once the task force has come up with recommendations on how to get a balanced budget for 6 years, then those recommendations and management partners' recommendations will be presented to the City Council on Thursday, September 10th at 5:30 p.m. at their budget retreat. And that'll all be online via Zoom. So the council will have a chance to listen to and discuss the recommendations from the task force and management partners on Thursday, September 10th at 5:30 p.m. Any questions on process? All right.
Thank you very much. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Steve Toller of Management Partners. And as Rob just said, he has done a lot of analysis and has now generated both findings and recommendations, and he's going to walk you through them. So Steve.
Thanks, Jim. Just wanted to do a check. Did you want to do the opening poll or you want to wait until later?
I was thinking we would do it later, right at
Okay.
the beginning of when the community is invited to speak.
I just didn't want to jump ahead of that. So
Yeah.
Great. Hi, everybody. It's good to see you again. My name is Steve Toller. I am a partner with Management Partners. Management Partners is a firm that consults exclusively with local government. And in fact, most of us that work for the firm have worked in local government in one way, shape, or form. And so we clearly have an idea and concept of what things don't work and what things do work. And we have a lot of experience when it comes to doing municipal budgeting and financial planning. And so tonight, I'm going to be presenting to you some information about, what the city's financial condition is in. And then we'll talk about our analysis that we did and the various strategies. I just mentioned who we are and the work that we end up doing. And so we have quite a few people that have helped with this project actually in terms of identifying potential solutions that the city could look towards implementing. So again, what I'll be sharing with you tonight is really an understanding of what the city's financial situation is in. We'll take a look at the various budget strategies that we identified for consideration. And then ultimately is then, hearing from you tonight in terms of your feedback regarding strategies that you think the city might be able to pursue as it moves forward in addressing the fiscal challenges that it's currently dealing with. So with that, let me start out by sharing a summary of the city's financial forecast. And when we go way back in time, 2019, I think it's helpful to think about and understand this general fund and the operating funds. The general fund that Rob was talking about earlier where does it get its money from, and then what does it spend it on? And as you can see here on these two pie charts, on the left side you see what the revenues are that the city collects. And so it collects property taxes, sales tax, there's a utility tax that's already in place. There's some franchise fees, some various fees for the licenses and permits that, for development services, et cetera. A whole bunch of different, revenue sources that come in that help provide the services that are shown here on the right. Whereas you are aware, the city contracts with King County Sheriff's Office for police services, also has a jail services contract for its jail. And so 1/3 of the expenses are in contracts. Otherwise, the services that are provided through people, personnel costs, the goods and services, the services and supplies that it needs to be able to provide those services to you, as well as funding some capital outlay. And then we mentioned, Rob mentioned earlier that these two funds, general fund and street fund, are joined at the hip. And it's this green pie right here, which is the hip joint, that shows how they're connected with each other, of which the general fund itself transfers about $850,000 a year over to the streets fund to attempt to keep it whole. That number on average has typically been about 600,000. In 2019, it ended up being a little bit more than that. And so that's where the city collects its money from and how it spends its money. And one of the key challenges that the city has, before I continue on in this, is that property taxes, again, makes up about 40% of the city's revenue sources. And I don't know if you're aware or not, but the city's total property tax that it can collect is done on what's called a levy basis. So the city is able to levy a tax, and it's levied on a total tax amount. And then that amount is then allocated based on assessed valuation of each property by the assessor's office. And that's ultimately then how you end up paying your property taxes, at least to the city, for the city's portion. That can only grow by no more than 1% per year, based on an action that the council can take by passing basically a resolution to approve an increase to that. Anything above 1% per year must be approved by voters. So the city has a limitation with one of its largest revenue sources that it cannot increase that by any more than 1% without going to voters to approve that. Sales tax, of course, will ebb and flow based on what's going on in the economy and what the sales tax generators are that are located in Kenmore. Utility tax keeps pace with the various revenue sources upon which it relies, which is the gross receipts of gas and electric, for example. And so then the other revenue sources, for the most part, tend to be fairly stable, with the exception of development fees. Those go up and down depending on what's happening in the economy. On the expenditure side of the house, though, the city is somewhat subject to cost of living adjustments, consumer price index changes. So you will remember 2 years ago in the King County area, CPI was well above 4%. With this recession, we'll see what that ends up being, and so it's probably a little bit more modest. But the city's costs end up increasing over time by about what CPI would be adjusted at. Let's say that's 2 or 3% on the long term. So it does create a little bit of an imbalance, especially when it relates to 40% of the city's revenue sources. Property tax is limited with only an increase of about 1% per year. So that's just one of the planning challenges that every city, frankly, in Washington State faces. So as we look at what the impacts are then for the city, when it looks at its forecast, way back in time before March of 2020, when the original forecast was completed before this recession hit, the city was expecting to have an ongoing structural gap that would grow to about just shy of about $2 million per year by the time we hit 2026. on the right-hand side is what the city's levels of reserves are. And reserves for a city is the same as like what you would have in a savings account or a piggy bank, but more of a savings account, although the interest you generate from both is probably about the same right now, right? But reserves are really more like your savings account. And so you have those savings set aside so that if a rainy day comes along, that you will be able to have the money to be able to withstand that rainy day. The same thing is true with the city in terms of building what is called its reserves. Some people call it fund balance. If you hear that word, it's the same. And so the city's reserves are at about the $3.5 million level that are undesignated, unrestricted, and available for future expenditures. And because of the drawdown each year, or this fiscal gap that exists between revenues and expenditures, and that's basically what these red bars are showing here, is that the expenditures are expected to exceed revenues by $1 million in 2024, $1.3 million in 25, and 1.94 in 26. That will ultimately, if not corrected, start drawing down reserves such that by 2025, the city would be pretty much at zero in terms of reserves, and then would go underneath that in 26. Now, of course, the city council, city staff would not allow that to happen. That's why they assembled this fiscal sustainability effort to really try to address that situation. And I think the other thing that we've noticed as we have looked at the city's revenues and expenditures, typically a city will only expend the revenues it is able to have. Otherwise, it starts drawing down its reserves and then will be unsustainable long term. And when we look at comparison of other cities around you and the cities with which with Kenmore compares itself, you see a stark contrast in terms of the annual general fund revenues that are generated on a per capita basis. And so you'll see cities like Kirkland, which have a significantly high amount of sales tax base and whatnot. And Mercer Island has had a high property tax level that they have levied for years in the past, and a whole host of other revenue sources that they've implemented, are pretty much way up here. The average for all these various cities that you're seeing on this chart is about $870. And Kenmore's general fund revenues per capita is about 560, which is below those other agencies. And so it's important to remember that in terms of the expenditures that the city is spending and the resources that are available to it in order to take care of that. So anyway, so there is that disparity on the revenue side that is currently existing. Well, that was before COVID-19. And now, since the pandemic, there has been a significant impact in terms of the revenues upon which the city relies. And I'll mention those in a minute here. But in anticipation of that and understanding that during that time frame from about the March-April timeframe until today, as Rob indicated or alluded to earlier, the city took some action to circumvent the fiscal impacts in this year from COVID-19 based on what it was seeing in terms of sales tax that was coming in and other tax sources that were coming in. And so the city took a preemptive strike, if you will, against what would occur from this pandemic, and ended up implementing reductions that netted to about $1.1 million for this current fiscal year, calendar year that we're in, that range from reducing street maintenance efforts to only those projects that really needed to take place to deal with the more severe issues that are happening. They reduced consulting costs. They reduced district court services and costs for that, technology projects, a whole host of different initiatives that the city implemented in order to stave off the impacts of COVID-19. Of this 1.1 million, 300,000 of those expenses are expected to be ongoing and forever and ever in the future. And so those have been factored in to the revised forecast that we've done. But as we looked at doing a revised forecast, we also have to take into consideration what's happening with respect to this economy. And you're seeing it. If you haven't personally been affected by it, you know others that have been affected by it. You know, during the stay home orders, the shelter in place orders, you know, unemployment significantly increased. And in fact, when we look at, you know, these charts are from from Washington State's Economic and Revenue Forecast Council. When you look at employment and what was projected originally back in February, you know, it was going to be total payroll, non-farm payroll within the state was about 3.6 million, edging up to about 3.7. And as a result of the pandemic, they have had to reset their forecast that significantly reduced statewide employment by about almost close to 20%, about 17% or so. And so the state is assuming that employment levels will remain behind what was expected. And the same thing is true when it comes to personal income. They've had to adjust what their expectations are in terms of personal income on an annual basis. And that's what those green lines are showing, and how they're, you know, shorter than what the original projections were. It has led to the state having to take some impacts. And the other thing that the state is expecting is that housing permits may likely drop as a result of the continual impact that unemployment and the impacts that we're seeing in the business sector and in the economy could likely have to development. And so the state is expecting a long-range economic recession. And we too are expecting that as well, based on all the signs that we're seeing and a lot of economists and what they're saying in terms of being able to recover and get back to whatever normal was before March of 2020. And let's face it, you know, the last recession that we had was back in 2008. Rough time frame. It started to really impact cities from 2009 through 2012, and started to have that, you know, and then cities were able to start recovering from that point. It took a while for it to happen. We were on an economic freight train for the last 10 years almost, that was you know, continuing to steam along. And then this pandemic hit, where we had to make choices to you know, try to reduce the impacts of that pandemic in terms of people's lives. And so the recession is likely to last for a prolonged period of time, and we expect it to last probably about 3 years. And in fact, when we look at what the impacts are on the revenue sources for the city, this chart shows the difference between this upper line in terms of what revenues were expected to be over the next 6+ years or so, and what we are now projecting them to be based on collections that we're seeing of sales tax primarily. That's the area that has been significantly hit, to the tune of about, we're expecting about a 25% drop in 2020 alone. And it'll take a while for that to recover. And so you end up having this more prolonged, some people call it an L-shaped recovery if you look at it sideways a little bit. But basically what's happening is that because there's about a three and a half, pretty close to $3.5 million revenue loss that the city is going to expect for 2024, it changes the impact in terms of the reserves and the potential drawdown of the reserves. And so when we combine the $1.1 million of action that the city took, 300,000 of which has an ongoing impact, and you add to that the revenue losses that the city is experiencing as a result of the recession that we're currently in, as Rob indicated before, the lines have well crossed, and revenues are not expected to keep pace with expenditures throughout the forecast. And again, remembering that the city has cut, again, 1.1 million in 1 year and 300,000 on an ongoing basis, the city still expects about a $1.8 million gap in its general fund by the time we hit 2027. And again, if no corrective action were implemented, the city would draw down its reserves in 2025 and would go below zero in 2026. And so even all the strides that the city has taken, it has helped defer the potential impact that this could have, because frankly, if the city had not done that $1.1 million reduction in this year, we would have seen these reserve levels be dropping further. And so by 24, you would have seen it going down to 0. And then beyond that, it would have stayed below 0 at that point. So what this all means is that the city is going to require about $750,000 in annual budget strategies. That's pretty darn close to 7.5% of its annual general fund budget. That would need to, starting in 2022, that would need to grow to $1.8 million to be able to keep pace with inflation by fiscal 27. And so there's a significant gap that the city is having to address as a result of that. And so let me then share with you kind of really this concept of fiscal sustainability and the budget strategies that we have identified with you, and then we'll stop and we'll turn it over to any questions. Fiscal sustainability planning really involves the concept of trying to ensure that the city remains solvent and is able to make good on its obligations to the fullest extent possible, as well as try to provide the level of services that are expected by the community. And there's 4 ways that typically cities will look at in terms of trying to deal with its fiscal sustainability. And the first 3 areas here on the left-hand side are intending to try to maintain service levels to the fullest extent possible. And if the fiscal impact of those 3 items are not able to provide that fiscal sustainability and ensure that the cost that the city is incurring for service delivery is matching the resources available to it, then the city will have to look towards reducing services. So the 3 areas that we typically look at are, the first area is expenditure controls and cost shifts. And what this basically means is the city trying to squeeze the nickel a little bit better, being more cost effective in terms of its existing contracts for service that it has, its existing compensation costs that it provides to employees, ways to be able to control those expenditures to the fullest extent possible. Again, trying to maintain service levels to you, the community. The second area that a city will look at is service delivery alternatives. Is it cheaper to and more cost effective to have services provided by another party, outsourcing services, perhaps even sharing services with another agency? In some regards, you have done that contracting through a shared services interagency agreement with King County Sheriff's Office for law enforcement, for public safety services. You've done the same thing for jail services. So those are some options that cities will look at in terms of different ways to provide services. Service delivery alternatives. The third area, of course, is looking to increase the size of the resources, the revenue that are available. And so those are done through revenue enhancements, either by increasing fees and charges for services, trying to expand the base of revenue availability, like through significant economic development, or bringing in a Walmart or a Costco to help drive some sales tax revenues in a community, or increasing the rate at which those revenues come in by either, again, as I mentioned, with fees, or increasing the tax rate, and that would be done through tax increases, some of which are able to be done by council per state law. In other cases, requires a vote of the people. As I mentioned, a levy lid lift for property taxes would require that. And so if the combination of those 3 are not able to address sustainability, then the city will have to look at service level reductions. And we took the same approach in terms of identifying what different options, strategies the city has to its availability. And so I want to start talking about the first area of cost efficiencies, and it was the first 2 boxes that you saw, which again is the concept of trying to maintain service levels to the fullest extent possible. And the first area is in this area called expenditure controls and cost shifts. There's three items that we looked at there. One of which is that the city is funding a school resource officer right now with the local school district, and the strategy would be for the city to reduce or eliminate its funding of that school resource officer program. There's already been discussion at the school district about potentially wanting to eliminate that program anyways, but that said, that is one strategy that cities look at, and that would be definitely applicable to Kenmore. The second is an area is with respect to the ball fields and park leases at Bastyr University. The city is incurring those costs. There is an opportunity that the city could shift some of those costs by charging for the use of those facilities right now, which it is not doing. And so that's a second area of a cost shift. And then the third area is something that's called a cost allocation plan, where the city looks at its administrative costs and allocates those to the fullest extent possible to other legally and viable funding sources, like stormwater fees or other areas that the city has that's outside of its general fund. There's 5 different service delivery alternatives that we looked at, one of which is the maintenance costs that the city is expecting to start incurring in a few years at Log Boom and Squires Park waterfront parks, by being able to look at the way it handles maintenance and shifting that to either a private entity to do that, or other ways to be able to make it more cost effective. The city has an opportunity to look at its organizational structure and reorganize itself to, again, try to maintain service levels to the fullest extent possible, but be more cost effective in its approach in doing that. The city could look for a jail provider alternative, but that will take time, and frankly, it would need to be another agency that's within the region that would make sense and would be able to not only reduce the contracted costs, but also reduce the amount of time that it takes for officers to transport well, people that are not doing good things into the jail. Fleet maintenance is another option. The city already contracts with the utility district to provide fleet maintenance services. There could be an option to looking at fleet maintenance alternative, as well as then the city looking and revisiting its parks capital improvement plans, much of which was the subject of the bond measure that was approved a few years ago. But by being able to more value engineer some of those projects to make them more cost effective on an operational perspective, could be options that the city could implement in trying to provide a different service there that still will be cost affordable. So those are the cost efficiency areas. The revenue enhancement areas kind of come in 2 different flavors. One is those items that the city council has the ability through state law to approve themselves through basically the adoption of a resolution. And the others are that would require voter approval. There's 6 strategies that we looked at in the area that's on the left here. Changes to the utility tax is something that the city could do in terms of either expanding the base of that by taxing other utilities that are not currently taxed, or increasing the rate. Photo traffic enforcement is another option that the city has to be able to help pay for the public safety costs and the traffic impacts and safety impacts as a result of the additional traffic that is being incurred in the community. The property tax levy, there's a bank capacity that the city did not implement the 1% for several years, a few years ago. That bank is about $400,000 right now. The city could decide to go ahead and add that to the property tax rolls for the future. They did a little bit of that this last year, so there's the opportunity to exercise that. The city could implement an admissions tax that would be for entertainment venues in the community. The city right now has a business and occupations, or B&O tax, that it is levying right now to heavy manufacturing firms. The city could go ahead and levy that just basically by council approval, because it's already on the books, but levy that for all of the businesses in the community, and also could increase its development services fees. 3 areas that would require voter approval would be the levy lid lift that I mentioned, the potential for a sales tax increase of 0.2%. That's the cap on that, and that would have to be dedicated to basically roadway improvements, transportation initiatives. And then the third area is the potential to create a metropolitan park district that would transfer the responsibility of maintaining parks and running park programs to a separate district with a separately elected board. The final area in terms of reductions, is to reduce the street pavement standards. One of the graphs that I was showing you before was assuming that the city would continue to fund $600,000 to the street fund. A recent pavement management study showed that the city is actually funding its roads to the tune of about $1 million less than what it needs to in order to maintain them to the levels that you are currently experiencing. And so already there's a shortage, but the city could reduce its pavement standards and live just based on basically the revenues that are coming from gas tax and other revenue sources that are funding that. Reducing travel meetings, consulting contracts is another option. Reducing recreation activities that are through the coordination effort through a recreation coordinator initiative that the city has. And then there's a whole host of other potential general fund service reductions. All told, the various strategies that we've identified range anywhere from about $7 to $8.5 million, and the goal is a $1.8 million. And this is again ongoing. It's assuming that the city would need to implement budget strategies that would be $1.8 million ongoing, not just in 1 year, but they would have to have an ongoing impact. And so with that, I'll turn it back. Rob, it looks like you're trying to say something, but are on mute. But I'll turn it back over to Rob and then to committee and the public for any questions.
If you go back to that previous slide.
There we are.
Yeah, that 1.8 million, that's operating. But in addition, as Steve, you just heard Steve say, there's an additional $1 million per year that we should be investing in our roads that we're not. So if you add that in, it's actually a $2.8 million problem.
Right. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Okay, it is 6:21 and we are scheduled to adjourn at about 6:55, although we may go right up to the 7 o'clock hour. So I guess I would like to ask, does anybody have a question of clarification for Steve? Not getting into positions or ideas yet, but just anything that Steve said you would just like to have clarified. And you might want to even show us your face on the screen and wave, because I'm having a little problem seeing the
Mr.
wave.
Hendrickson has a question.
Thank you, John.
Good. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, thank you. When you're looking at the reduction in sales tax revenue, there's talk going around that Murphy's Auction is thinking about leaving. Or have you guys factored that in at all?
Sorry, I was on mute, John. The forecast is based on the existing business environment that was in 2019, and we then reduced what the revenue expectations were in 2020. There was no significant impacts expected related to either business loss or new businesses coming in.
Okay, so I don't know if we need to factor that in or what Rob or anyone else has heard about that. Another thing on sales tax is the construction period sales tax. Cities like Bothell, that's such a volatile number. When you're in a boom cycle, you have a lot of cash coming in, like we built Kenmore Village, and all kinds of sales tax came booming in there. And that's not money you can count on every year. And so really should be put in capital projects. And that's what Bothell does with all of their construction period sales tax. How much of this 25% decline is the construction period sales tax?
That is something I'm going to have to go into the model and take a look at, and I may have to get back to you on that, John. So I will. I need to research that a little bit further.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions of clarification?
I have one more if you want it.
Not yet, please. I'm going to let somebody else ask a question, then I'll take you again. Okay.
I don't see that anyone has raised their hand. Or
Okay.
is waving at me through their video.
Thank you, too. Okay, John, if you have one more question, then we'll go into the actual comment period by everybody.
Okay. Have you provided, Steve, have you looked at and given the task force the historical information on our pavement management and how we've been underfunding that for about the last 10 years or so? And you know, we had a big shortfall that we needed to put a lot of money in. I forget, about 6 years or so ago, and then we hired a new consultant, and then that he gave us a different report. So there's a lot of history there. There's a lot of underfunded. I just wasn't sure if everyone is familiar with that history, and if you're familiar with that history.
I will just say that the documents that we looked at were the most recent pavement management study to really understand what the expected, based on the current roadways, their conditions, and what the expected funding is of those. So we took a look at the most recent pavement management standards and that study, and then projected out what that could mean for the city. So
It might be helpful for people to know the history and how much we've underfunded this deliberately over the years, and how important it is to not continue to do that, and not to suggest, I think it's not good to suggest to people that maybe we should reduce our pavement management when we've been neglecting it for years. I mean, that information should be out there, just a suggestion.
Okay, thank you.
Looks like David Dorian has his hand raised.
Okay, Mr. Dorian, good evening.
Good evening. I'm going to frame this as a question for clarification. Steve, you touched on the jail services, and that would be very difficult to find a different contract provider for. Is that the same assessment for the policing services? Is that with King County Sheriff Office that would be very difficult to find any other service providers, and that's why that's not being looked at fully?
yeah, you know, thanks for that question, David. You know, shared service alternatives have a real opportunity for some great things to happen, especially if they're done the right way. You get agencies that come together that have the sharing of the same mind in terms of the services and how they're going to be able to provide them. But it takes time for them to get those types of agreements together. And the other challenge that you have really is you know, what are the potential, you know, opportunities that you really have, you know, to be able to share with others. And so, you know, all you have to do is start looking around, you know, the area, and, you know, do you look to Kirkland and do something there? Do you look at, you know, Bothell to do something there with their agencies? It's a difficult challenge. So we did not assume any potential for another public safety service to be able to serve you. You know, nor did we look at insourcing that, but frankly, from the experience that we have in working with cities, especially the nature and the size of Kenmore, insourcing police will cost you a lot more money. And so we have typically, you know, looked at the concept of shared service, especially where you have a, you know, a shared service model. So I don't know, does that answer your question, David?
It does, yeah, for clarification, that does. Thank you.
Yeah. And Rob, I don't know if you had any perspective to share on that in terms of, you know, really opportunities that there are regionally.
Yeah, I mean, I bet if we asked, you know, Bothell or Lake Forest Park, maybe Kirkland would entertain the idea of providing police services for us. Do I have any reason to believe they would provide it less expensively or more effectively than the sheriffs? No, but could we go through the exercise? Yes. Would it be a major effort? Yes.
I make one quick comment, because I actually was very interested in this, and I went and just did my own little analysis looking at the budgets of the same comparisons company or cities that Management Partners did, and we actually are a significantly lower police public safety budget per capita. The numbers that I calculated, which I'm not an expert, but it was pretty easy to take the police public safety line divided by the population, and we were at 343, where the next lowest was over 500. and most of them were in the 500 to 600 to 700 range. So I wanted to understand that, and I felt like the comments made by Rob and Steve were consistent with the information that I saw, that our police costs on a per capita basis is actually very, very reasonable.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. It is 6:29, so I'm going to move to the next session, which would open the meeting up to all of your comments. And just to remind you of some of our ground rules about speaking for 3 minutes or even less. And I'll look for people who haven't had a chance yet to ask questions or to speak. We want to start this session with a quick polling. And so I guess I'm turning that back to Steve and Tila. So we're going to poll all of you.
Okay, sure. I will just launch the first one. So folks should see 3 different questions on their screen. And let me know when I should end it, Jim.
Okay. And I don't know, Rob, or especially Rob and Joanne or Steve, if you want to like comment on anything we're seeing here. Obviously, it looks like everybody who is
well, they aren't able to see the results yet, so Teal will have to share that.
Mm-hmm.
Got that.
Yeah, so it looks like we have 13 out of 18 attendees. Oh, up to 14. Very cool. There is also a hand raised from Stacy. I don't know if there is a question maybe, or.
Stacy, do you have a question?
Yes, I just wanted to ask if in the forecast for taxes, if all the developments that were given the 12-year tax exemption is included in that forecast.
Looks like you're muted, Steve.
Let me unmute. Joanne, did you want to respond to that?
Sure. They were not, because they are just outside that window of our forecast. So those tax abatements do not expire during the 6-year period.
And what we're talking about is one property, which is the Spencer 68 apartments.
All right, so it looks like we have 16 out of 18. Am I good to end the poll?
Yeah, I think we can move on.
Okay, let's see.
Yeah, so you're going to
So
share.
everyone should see the results now.
Mm-hmm. Quite a few of you participated in previous city-sponsored meetings or surveys. That's great.
Cool.
Okay. Should we go on to the next poll?
And I wonder if the working in Kenmore has anything to do with the pandemic. Working from home in Kenmore?
All right, so these are questions about the balancing act.
And this is the tool that, of course, has been out for the public for about the last 2 weeks or so. We just wanted to know if you had used it, what you think about it. So quite a few have participated in it.
50-50 on whether they like it or not.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess, yeah, haven't shown the
Let's
results.
see. 15. We had 16 people last time, so I can go ahead and end it.
Yeah,
Ready?
Good.
Okay. So
So
then
now we
everybody can
see the
see.
results.
Oh wow, yeah.
Joanne, did you want to just say anything about the feedback you got from the sponsors of this about this particular participation rate?
Sure. The folks at Balancing Act were pretty astounded at the participation rate that the city of Kenmore experienced. We had over 200 simulations that were submitted. And I think we had over 700 to 800 people who actually visited different pages and took some actions, but especially over 200 participants who balanced the budget. That was a pretty incredible number. And they also informed us that we had more comments on our simulation than any other client has had, big city or small. So
That's
I thought it was
saying a lot because City of
I thought that was
Tacoma just
pretty
got downstairs.
well, in Denver and Phoenix and many others. And I just thought that was pretty awesome to get that type of community engagement here in Kenmore.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, I'm looking at the clock, and I think it would be so interesting to hear why people liked it, why they didn't. But I guess I would just make a request. Can you go to the city's website, or you can send me a note about what you liked about it or why you didn't like about it? I think that would be really helpful for the city to learn. And I wish we had a little bit more time tonight, but I think it's more important we hear your ideas. So let's go on to the third poll.
All right, so these questions are about financial health. They're a little bit longer than the others.
Just everybody can see that again. How do you feel about the overall financial health of the city? Do you think it's excellent, good? We don't know. It's fair, poor? Looks like we're getting some responses. Good, thank you. It's 13 so far.
Do they have the ability to scroll to the next question? To what would you? Are there 3 questions on this?
Just 2 on this one.
Okay.
I think the next one has 3.
But can everybody see all the choices with number 2, Tila? On my screen, I just see 1.
Yeah, you should be able to scroll.
Oh, okay. So,
Or I made the window a little bit bigger, and then that helped. Looks like we got 14 out of 18
Okay.
people. Am I good to end it?
Sure.
Twice.
Oh, 15. Okay. All right. Those are the results.
and then 1 more poll, right?
Can you scroll down? I need to see the results for the second question.
You have to scroll down, Rob.
Yeah, I can't. That's special to you.
Okay. And then, so to maintain its current level of service has a great need for additional funding, some need. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. And the last poll about balancing the budget. So this has 3 questions. We need to scroll to see them all.
And can they choose more than one? Do they have more than one choice?
Yes. Yeah. These are all the first and second in this are multiple choice.
So they could, so like on question number 1, if you were to balance the budget by making expenditure cuts, they could click on 3 things if they wanted to?
Yep.
Okay.
Huh? And it looks like Zoom does keep these results for us so we can look at them later. We don't have to worry about taking screenshots.
Great.
I think we have a little bit more time for people to answer.
We're at 15 of 18.
Okay.
Been going for 2 minutes.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
There are the results.
So this gives us a little background information about what you're all thinking. And we do want to go on to give you an opportunity to, as the agenda says, to suggest ideas that you have for how the city should address the long-term financial structural imbalance, or on the long term, make the city financially sustainable.
This is interesting. Thank you, everybody, for participating in this. Okay.
Good. So again, if you can keep your comments as brief as possible, as specific as possible, I want to just ask you, what are some of the thoughts and ideas you have regarding making the city, or on the long term, financially sustainable?
So go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to speak.
Kayla Kelsey is raising her hand, I think is by doing it through a reaction, so.
Okay, Kelsey, why don't you go ahead?
That was correct, whoever called that out. Thank you. I actually had been trying to ask a question earlier of Steve, and I guess I'll kind of just pose it more as a comment then. But I kind of found the response to David's question for me a little insufficient, because I don't think that it's necessarily just about finding a new contract, or working with Bothell or whatever through their public safety quote unquote services. I think it could be more like, well, if we put up a red traffic light camera, do we really need cops also patrolling the neighborhoods looking for people rolling through a stop sign, right? Or whatever could be caught by that same red light camera. Could we instead take those cops off the street, take away that role, and save that money? Things like that I would be more interested in said. Things like jail alternatives, I'd also be really interested in seeing where where all the different meetings we've been holding with city council, where they're going and what they're actually going to be making actual deliberate decisions to affect change in Kenmore with public safety, and how that could be affected by the budget as well. I see no reason to have cops right now being the third of the budget, and potentially more if we start a bigger slice of that, if we start taking money away from other areas, when all they can do is put people in jail who then become even more destitute later on, and even more hurt by this pandemic and this crippling economy. I don't see that as a functional solution. And I'll go ahead and yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Kelsey. By the way, this meeting is being recorded and we are taking notes, so we are capturing all of the comments. I appreciate this. Okay.
Not sure
Who
if
else
you
has a
want to
question?
respond to that or not, so.
Tila got the clock in front of us, so I can't see if anybody is raising.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Here, I'll stop.
Okay.
Looks like I don't see that anyone has their hand raised.
John Hendrickson.
Mr. Hendrickson, there we go.
Let's go let Cody go first, and then we'll go to John. And Cody, are you on mute?
Yes, I was.
But now you're not. Good. We can hear you.
Yeah, now I lost my train of thought. I think we should, just like the last lady said, traffic cameras would be awesome and a source of revenue. I don't know if I would go with cutting, police force costs necessarily, but that would be an increase in revenue. And I think the focus should more be about definitely increasing the revenue rather than cutting stuff that actually attracts people to Kenmore. Because then you're just in this endless circle of things where you're not going to have the revenue because nobody wants to live in Kenmore. Because we're cutting public safety, police force. You want to cut parks maintenance and fields. So what will attract people to Kenmore if you guys are talking about cutting those things that make people want to actually live here? So that's the big issue I had. And I was the one, there was, I think you guys heard Friday, I don't know how long the survey was out, but in the question about Bastyr and that agreement, the total amount of money for whatever programs Kenmore's running was over $500,000 over 2 years, but only one program was mentioned. So I felt like the survey question was completely disingenuous and not accurate. If you wanted to ask that question, every one of those programs should have been listed and not a loaded question. Because that decision impacts 660 people. No, more than that. That's just Little League. That question impacts thousands of kids in Kenmore. And I'm not sure if you know the background of fields and all that stuff in Kenmore as a consultant. I know, Elizabeth, you're on the task force. You're acutely aware of that. But it just seems, if you want to attract people, if you want to have revenue, cutting things that impact kids and families like that, it just doesn't sit well with me. I was in a little town of Colfax, Washington over the weekend playing softball. Less than 3,000 people live there. They have 6 beautiful fields. The hotel was packed. Every restaurant was packed. Everybody's getting takeout. So if you want revenue, you got to think about stuff like that to bring people to our community. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Cody. Thank you. John Hendrickson, you had your hand up, and I said I would call on you right after Cody, so why don't you go ahead, please, sir. Does John need to be unmuted?
Yeah, I'm unmuted now. Okay, so these are just comments, right, for 3 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. I would say, if you think about that, back around 2001, taxpayers voted to reduce our annual levy limit from 6% to 1%. And that's what it really is going to require is really a mutual respect and dialogue between the city and taxpayers, and say, what do we want to vote for? And we need a process that's going to accommodate that, where people really feel respected and informed and can participate. And so when you guys were talking about we have a revenue loss, you put up a chart about the reduction in revenue reserves. So those are 2 different things. You got a beginning balance, money in, money out, and an ending balance in your reserves. Fund accounting, it's a terrible accounting system, but that's how it works. That doesn't help us understand revenue. If we just had a trial balance where we could see each of our revenue items and where you're taking it, where you're projecting the loss of revenue for each line item, it's only about, it used to be 16, maybe it's 25 or something. Not hard to do. As far as the Parks District, as a recommendation, the cost of having an elected board to do our parks, and you're just pushing the same tax over to a different district, and we all have to pay that tax. Doesn't seem very prudent or efficient. To reduce the pavement, that recommendation, I found the numbers. We started underfunding pavement back in 2005 by about 100,000, 200,000 a year until 2010. And then in 2010, we were underfunded by about $1,493,000. And I got off the council in 2011, but this pavement has been underfunded, seriously underfunded for a long time. That information, everyone needs to know about that. And they really need to know that we've been paying road tax every year for the last 20 years, and the city refuses to even acknowledge that we pay it because they use it for other things. City Hall, administrative stuff. It's over $100 million over the last 20 years. The police you know, people don't realize how few police we have ever had around here. You know, no one's hardly checking anybody rolling through stop signs. I bet Cody Painter's probably running stop signs left and right, going to ball games. And as you know, when you look at the public works, we were going to pay $6 million for a new building, and we got Twin Springs Park just sitting over there, 25 acres. The last thing I would say, Jim, is that look at Briar. We're a small city with no commercial real estate, 85% residential, very little sales tax. There's other cities like that. We don't even look at them and say, hey, we need to be like them. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Maybe at this point, since it is about 6:50, can you just show of hands how many other people wanted to make a comment? You could just see a show of hands. Are there like four?
It's like three people.
Okay. Tila, I'll need your help. Just why don't you go ahead and we can.
Okay, John Paul Mickle. Go ahead and unmute.
Hey, thanks for the time this evening. So I just wanted to piggyback on some of the other comments that I've heard people take. First of all, my position going in is budget is not for profit. We take the minimum amount of fees from our residents as possible to provide basic needs and services, not nice to haves. I think what Steve laid out is a possibility that is very believable, that for the next 4 to 6 years, we're going to have financial hardships, not only for the city, but for the residents that pay the taxes to make the city happen. So at this time, to be looking at creativity to tax more on people that are looking at a 4 to 6 year economic downturn is not a wise thing for the city to be doing. With that said, in the limited amount of budget information that we were allowed to play with in the variables in the budget tool, I don't see that we have a financial crisis over the next 1 year to 6 years, in that if you cut the nice to haves, then take care of the must haves, we're fine. The budget gets balanced. I'm doing that for my budget in a downturn of unemployment and increased costs. I'm getting rid of nice to haves in my household to take care of the must haves. I will have heat, I will have shelter, I will have food, I will have clothing, but I'm not going to have all of the cable TV packages that I would like to have because it's not necessary. So the city needs to approach it in the same way. The entertainment that you're providing to the city, that can go. I don't need 4th of July fireworks from the city. I will take care of my own entertainment. That's what families should be doing in support of their community, is we will take care of those things for ourselves. The city doesn't need to do it for us. I think things that were locked in that budget should be on the table. Just like some people have talked about personnel costs being 60% of this budget, should be something that's opened up and we explore, hey, why is that 60% cost locked and what kind of cuts might we be making in that realm of the budget? $500,000 for a city operation maintenance facility equipment, not real estate. I don't think that's something that has to be on the table this year. That can be postponed. So again, there were limits in those variables that we could play with as folks that were looking at your budget tool. I think we should be looking at the people that live in Kenmore, not the people that we might like to have Kenmore somewhere down the future. So let's not worry so much about attracting people that are here that might come here. Let's worry about the people that are actually here and how they're going to pay for things. I think the idea that 94% of your budget comes from taxing residents, trying to say we're going to increase that tax burden is not a sales pitch that you can make when you really need to be cutting the services that you need to provide. The benchmark on every document that I've seen from Kenmore is affordable living, affordable living. So if rent doesn't come down and you're going to increase our expenses, and now you're going to give me a speeding ticket or a red light ticket when it goes from yellow to amber and take $250 on a ticket to me, you're not making this an affordable living community. So again, I think the great statistic you had there, 80% is residential, not commercial. You need to take care of your residents first.
Thank you, Mr. Mickle, very much. I can see it looks like Mandy, is it Mayor, Victoria Grayland, and then back to David wanting to speak. So Mandy, why don't we start with you, please?
Hi, thank you. So I'm just going to piggyback on what Cody Painter already said earlier. I have been the scheduler for North Lake Little League for the past 5 years, and I'm going to be the league president going into the next season. I've been spending the whole weekend doing the math, trying to figure out what would happen if we lost Bastyr. It would be, our league would have to cut about 200 kids out of our league because we would lose 2 of our main fields that we use for baseball. We don't need fields for T-ball and rookies and the little guys that play that are like 4 to 7 years old, because they have a tee and throw down bases. We can kind of put them anywhere. Sometimes we'll just put them in the outfield at Baster. They don't need a backstop. They don't need like a traditional baseball field. But unfortunately, our 10 to 12-year-olds, they need 200-foot fences. And most of the schools, or most of the school fields in our boundary are not big enough. So if we lose Bastyr, the only field we have is Morelands, and that's the only field that our kids can play on that has a 200-foot fence. So it would have a significant impact on the kids that play in our area. And I'm not sure what the answer is, but if we lost that lease, also our league cannot cover that cost of the lease, because just coming out of COVID and not being able to give everyone 100% refund, we are not in a position where we could increase our, registration costs. We would lose a lot of members that way as well. And that, I'm done. Yeah, you guys can use the rest of my time.
Thanks for being so powerful and efficient. Thank you very much. Ms. Grayland, do you want to say, you have some comments you want to make tonight?
Yes, I do. Thanks. I didn't use the tool. I thought that it was a distraction. It was telling people, look over here and don't look at the bigger issues, I thought. I would like to see even more than 50,000 reduction in consulting fees. I think the city has more employees than ever. And if the employees are experts in their fields, then why not use their expertise? One of the questions on the tool was about hiring a climate action plan director. We currently have an environmental services director, Richard Sawyer, and I have total confidence in Mr. Sawyer's ability to handle the climate action plan. Those are all my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And David Dorian, let's come back to you, please, sir.
Thank you. My comments are around the process, I think, and understanding that there needs to be a balance between expediency of getting to some recommendations right now, but also the length of time with which these recommendations are being set for. So 6 years versus a short amount of time because of the impact of COVID, of bringing the committee together. Just especially thinking of that in the context of the last meeting where the equity tool was shared, and the important point of thinking about the impact on members of our community that has been made by various different people tonight. I wonder if there is a way to find balance of enabling the decisions that need to be made, but also leaving room for space to grow. Because I feel like we're at a tipping point, certainly with the pandemic, in terms of a negative tipping point for revenues for municipalities and cities. There's also various other tipping points. I know a number of people have been brought to speak to the council recently about public safety. Certainly, if you look at the comments on Facebook that have been shared in groups like Kenmore Neighbours, there is quite a lot of shock around the size of the budget that we have for public safety. I personally wasn't shocked because I've seen the percentages of general fund that are used for that purpose. However, I think there's possibly a question of having boiled a frog around that with municipalities, and that it's just become a self-fulfilling prophecy that is the percentage of general fund that is spent. I appreciate there's probably not much in the short term that the city can do, which is part of the expediency thing, right? I think if we have to get a decision, we're obviously not going to get a decision that is somewhere the budget is going to get cut anytime soon. However, I think alongside a recommendation that during a pandemic where millions of people have lost their jobs or been furloughed, that the budget for public safety is just off the table, especially when we look at things like an SRO costing between the city and the school district. I think $120,000 a year was the quoted figure for a part-time role. There are some things that we need to look at that have just become accepted sacred cows that I think we're at a tipping point where they may no longer be by the time we get to 2-3 years, let alone 6 years. So if there's a way to respect the need to consider equity, consider impact on the residents, people have spoken about passionately tonight, alongside obviously having to get a decision. I mean, we clearly have to get to a decision because our lines are going to cross. But I worry how hard it is to roll back those decisions sometimes once they've been made. So if there's a way to just keep that lens in discussions, especially around the equity tool that was shared last time, and that point around the speed of which the new task force has to come to its recommendation, I think it would be wise to keep that lens open. I don't see the rest of my time.
Thank you very much, sir. Well, it is 6:59. I don't see that anyone else has their hands up. We are due for a task force meeting to start in about 1 minute. And I just wanted to remind you that we always, by tradition, have 5 minutes worth of public comments at the start of that meeting. You're also all welcome. Hopefully you have the link to that meeting. I don't want to have the last word. I just thought perhaps Rob, you would like to thank folks.
Yeah, thank you everybody for coming tonight. I found this very helpful, and any additional input and thoughts and perspectives we can get are definitely helpful. And I hope that that's helpful to the task force members that are here tonight as well. So yeah, with that, we'll go into the next task force meeting. At that meeting, there's going to be opportunity for public comment, and also we're going to talk about the Balancing Act results. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.